Hello, my name is Michael Dwan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and life coach in private practice in London. Welcome to this 35th video in my series titled Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. Today I want to talk about the word colorblindness. I'll start with a punchline. It's the wrong word. While it's commonly attributed to Martin Luther King Jr. as the message of his I Have a Dream speech, he never said it. Not in that speech and not anywhere. He didn't use that word. He said he dreamed of a day when we would not judge each other by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. He didn't say we wouldn't or shouldn't see skin color, only that it not be the basis of our judgments of each other. I think we need a better word than colorblindness, one that states explicitly what most reasonable people mean when they say colorblindness. It's not meant to say that one doesn't see skin color nor wishes to be blind to the consequences of racial prejudice. It means something else. It means that one aspires to see beyond the superficiality of skin color to something more fundamental and important in other people, as well as in oneself. It's a declaration of a vision that transcends racism. I propose that we stop using the term colorblindness. Race hustlers have seized on it by asserting that it betrays a willful ignorance meant to perpetrate racism, when in fact it suggests the opposite. Because the word can and has been easily misinterpreted in this way, I think we need language that is more precise and less easily falsely construed. I believe that this distortion of the meaning of the word colorblindness is intentional and disingenuous. It's employed because the very idea that it promotes is a threat to its rigid ideological commitment to the belief that human life is organized around power that advantages some and disadvantages others. The oppressors are bad and the oppressed are good. This view exhausts, supposedly, all that we need to know about human relations. So instead of a word that declares what is not seen, we need words that say clearly what is or ought to be seen. The most parsimonious expression for this that I've come across is common humanity or vision of common humanity. This doesn't imply blindness to anything. Instead, it states clearly what we can and ought to look for and see in all people, including ourselves. It doesn't exclude anything, but it does suggest something fundamentally important that we should not overlook, but too often do, even willfully. In their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff identify two kinds of identity politics. One they call common enemy, and the other common humanity. The former is epitomized by Adolf Hitler, and the latter by Martin Luther King Jr., while Haidt and Lukianoff acknowledge that left-wing politics, as expressed on college campuses, for instance, are provoked by far-right movements off campus. Those far-right movements are also embedded in a common enemy, identity politics. So the problem with common enemy political identities spans the far end of both the political left and right. I will be elaborating on this, and while I'm addressing its expression in the far left, the same can be said of the far right. Given that critical theory is generally antagonistic to the idea of human universals, it tends to reject the idea of common humanity. One is hard-pressed to find any mention of such a thing in critical theory's copious critiques of human relations. Its basic criticism is that asserting human universals runs counter to the recognition of human diversity, and failing to see diversity results in automatically imposing our own or our own culture's standards of normality on everyone else. This is tantamount to the imposition of a dominant group's values and standards onto people and groups perceived to be outside of the dominant group. This is something a white supremacist does. Often this argument rests on the idea that we are born with a blank slate, which means that our perception of reality and all our experience is the product of social constructions, which are fabricated to exercise power and have nothing to do with the fiction we like to call reality. Asserting otherwise is nothing but a power grab. While I'm making a case for replacing colorblindness with the words common humanity, I want to make a further point before moving on. Imagine if we were literally colorblind. Imagine that we were incapable of perceiving race and therefore unable to categorize anyone on that basis. Wouldn't all discrimination and prejudice then evaporate like piss under a hot sun? One might argue that this makes a case for keeping the word colorblindness, except, of course, that this is only hypothetical and is in fact impossible. Unless literally blind, we do see skin color and cannot not see it. And once seen, the possibility of prejudice arises. So, despite this possible argument, I still think we need a better word. It's important to ask and understand, I believe, why having a vision of common humanity is better than judging people based on the color of their skin. This goes for racism of any kind, whether it be the white supremacy of the KKK or the politically correct racism of critical social justice theory. The reason is because a vision of common humanity cuts through the human tendency to categorize people into in-group and out-group status. Categorizing people in this way often results in dehumanizing the outgroup or otherizing them, as is often said. This then justifies treating them poorly or even exterminating them. This tendency is the natural consequence of having evolved within different groups, all competing for resources. The tendency to do this is not going away. But we can at least try to mediate it by having a larger vision, rather than espouse a solution that is just more of the same. Okay, now let's get into what we might include in a vision of common humanity. It's not hard to identify what all human beings share in common. Most of such things are blatantly obvious and indisputable. This includes the following. We're born of a mother, and we will die. We have a body that experiences pain and pleasure. We must eat and drink to survive. We have various needs and desires. We feel emotions. We form emotional attachments. We come from some sort of family. We think thoughts. We sleep and we dream. We make sense and meaning of the world, of our life, and of ourselves. We communicate with others and experience conflict with them. We cooperate and we compete with others. We experience losses of all kinds. We are, to varying degrees, vulnerable to injury and illness. We must contend one way or the other with others' expectations and their disapproval. We create homes, or at least try to find a safe place to be. We are impacted for better or worse by our physical environment. I could go on, but hopefully this list begins to make the case for a shared or common humanity. These things are true for all people, regardless of what culture they are a part of. And yes, you're right. Each item on this list is experienced and expressed in an infinite number of ways, and every individual's culture or social context will have its influence. This should be recognized and appreciated. But this does not negate the shared substrate of common humanity at the root of diverse individual lives. To ascribe or prescribe a particular way of experiencing or expressing these common human conditions based either on one's own model or that of one's own culture would be a mistake. It would constrict one's understanding of others and therefore one's capacity to respond to others with empathy and compassion. But this doesn't remove the fundamental conditions that all human beings face and share. Underneath and before our myriad differences is the vast, shared, existential reality of what is entailed in being human. So what happens, or what is at least made possible by a recognition of our common humanity? When we can see ourselves in others and others in ourselves, we feel empathy. If we're able to recognize our own pain and suffering as well as our joys, As we navigate our lives, we can recognize and appreciate the same in others. This regardless of their skin color or group identity. We can feel along with them, even though what exactly evokes pain or joy in others may be significantly different from what evokes the same in ourselves. Nevertheless, the underlying experience will be more or less the same. And from empathy comes compassion. The impulse to be of service arises. We then seek, when possible, to understand the source of another's suffering as well as what brings them joy. We want to do what we can to help them mitigate the former and increase the latter. For those who have no such compassionate impulse, this entire conversation will be of no sincere interest. And if such a person wants to insinuate their opinions, nevertheless, I feel no guilt in disregarding them until or unless they demonstrate the capacity to care about others. Just as engineers determined to build a safe airplane should not feel compelled to include anyone in their collaborations who has no interest or regard for safety. Empathy and compassion, while common across cultures, may not be universally experienced by all people, yet it can be cultivated in most. The woke make an ostensible claim of empathy and compassion per critical social justice. Although not often explicitly stated, it seems that its aim is to locate and identify the source of human suffering and to provide a solution to relieve it. The source, they propose, is the oppression of certain groups by other dominating and oppressing groups. The solution is to liberate the oppressed from the oppressors. In the case of race, white people represent the oppressing group, white supremacy, and all non-white groups are the oppressed. As I have been addressing the word colorblindness, we could just focus on race. But with the introduction of the concept of intersectionality, we can now see that the binary of oppressed and oppressor is applied to multiple groups. When this view is taken exclusively, such that it eclipses a view of common humanity, it perpetuates the in-group, out-group dichotomy, encourages othering, promotes dehumanization, and generates resentments and hatred. It does precisely what it is that causes the problems they claim to care about and seek to remedy. The three greatest champions of racial equality, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela, all believed that it was a recognition of our common humanity and not a shared hatred, even of their oppressors, that would lead to reconciliation. And they were right. A political identity based on a vision of shared humanity is superior to that of a shared enemy when it comes to overcoming unnecessary suffering caused by prejudice. Let's take a moment to consider all of this in the arena of psychotherapy. If a therapist simply tries to impose their own frame of reference, whether personal, cultural, or political, on the client's experience, their supposed good intentions are likely to be ineffective at best. If the therapist is blindly ethnocentric, morally absolutist, politically ideological, or even zealously committed to their own psychological theories, in short, they will suck as a therapist. A good psychotherapy training will highlight this possible mistake and teach skills that strengthen the therapist's ability to meet the client where they are and start from there. This means the therapist will recognize the client's common humanity and where it overlaps with the therapist, as well as how that is experienced and lived in a unique way by each client. This reveals that the particular sources of suffering and joy will be different for each client, as well as what will make sense to each in terms of mediating the former and cultivating the latter. Implied here is that awareness of common humanity and of sensitivity to diversity are not mutually exclusive. We don't have to choose one or the other. Not only that, but one without the other is insufficient and inevitably problematic in predictable ways. The woke could theoretically contribute to something to this. Its rhetoric suggests that it advises therapists to avoid imposing personal or cultural frames on clients The therapist should cultivate the skill to work with diverse clients on their own terms. However, because of its rejection of human universals and its embrace of a common enemy, political identity, it shoots itself in the foot right out of the box. It is simplistic and reductive in its way of categorizing people into identity groups that are either oppressed or oppressing. It cultivates resentment and even hatred in those it has decided are victims. It appropriates the purpose of therapy as a healing art and reassigns it to political activism. It's ill-equipped to recognize common humanity, and so is a caricature of empathy, and starts with assumptions that blind it to the true uniqueness of each client. By emphasizing grievances and victimhood, whether a client believes this is true or not, the therapist tries to bring the client to so-called critical consciousness. In other words, indoctrinate them with their own political ideology. In the process, the therapist will de-emphasize the client's personal responsibility, also known as power. And toward clients who can be categorized as privilege, critical social justice engenders an attitude of contempt and a dismissal of the ways that such clients also suffer and their equal right to address this and pursue joy. Simply stated, this isn't good. Therefore, I think the word colorblindness ought to be replaced by the words a vision of common humanity. This more precisely expresses the true and intended meaning of colorblindness, while being less likely to be seized to make false allegations of nefarious intent. Although I shouldn't underestimate the woke's genius for making language mean whatever it wants it to mean. I've also addressed how such a vision can go hand in hand with a recognition of diversity and is not automatically antagonistic to that value, as is so often argued by critical social justice. If we truly wish to transcend racism, I believe this is the way, not a reconfiguration of us-them, in-group, out-group mentality into a politically correct ideology that paves the way to more of the same. While this all plays out on the larger stage of society, I have also suggested something about what it looks like in the arena of psychotherapy. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, click the bell for notifications, leave me a comment, and share it with a friend. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Look for the common humanity in everyone, especially your enemies, and I hope you will join me for my next video. Bye for now.